But I was just reflecting that Martin asked me to come and speak at what he described as the launch of the Greater Manchester CRN. And I was just thinking that this is, to continue the analogy, a vessel that has already been launched and is sailing. And I think it's important to take stock of the voyage so far to conclude that particular metaphor. Because the reality is, you, many of you, all of you, I guess, to some degree, have been part of creating the world's largest integrated health research system. And these figures give the evidence base for that assertion. I've, as Martin and others of you will do get the chance from time to time to travel around a bit, and I can say we are the envy of Europe and we're the envy of the US in our ability to create this integrated health research system, of which arguably the clinical research network is the most important part. And I say that because it is the point of contact for pretty much the entire NHS. And the figure in the top left there it indicates the extent to which all the NHS is engaged in this enterprise. And you and we have made progress on some of those really tough nuts, including research governance, approval time, and all good stuff. And the patient participation rates are really exceptional. So the challenge as we move forward to the next stage of network development is to take these 15 unified clinical networks and build on that success. I'm not going to spend too long on what I would consider the botany and the taxonomy of the network structures, because many of you will be familiar with them. But there is a prior question, is why are we reorganizing in the way that we are? And there are really two reasons. The first is that the NHS, of course, is changing. The landscape is now, shall we say, rather different to that preceded this particular government. And we see an increasing role, for example, of any qualified provider. So the role that the public sector has played is changing in terms of the provision of healthcare. And we need a health research system that is able to include the private sector as well as the public sector. We also need to be much slicker in terms of our business processes, and that includes being more flexible in how we deploy resources. So if that, if you like, is the policy and organisational imperatives, then there is a second class of reasons that we're changing, and it is the scientific drivers. And there are two key ones I draw attention to here, familiar to many of you, I'm sure. The first is the impact of stratified medicine. We're already seeing this extensively in areas such as oncology, where the number of studies that we're being asked to conduct is increasing, but the number of patients recruited per study is decreasing as those patients are being deeply stratified, intensive phenotyping and genotyping and all related technologies are leading to very specific patient cohorts for particular types of drugs. The other very positive impact, where you have a particularly leading role here in the Northwest and in Manchester, is in the use of the big data. Big data is a term that's bandied around a lot. In our context, it means at least two things. The first of which is the possibility of using computational techniques to both generate and test hypotheses in a way that we've not been able to do hitherto. And the second is the real-world data studies, extracting from real-world clinical data collected in the normal course of events potential answers to particular research questions. And here, of course, the Salford Lung Study is leading the charge. So I just thought it would be valuable as we, having looked backwards and noted the progress made, if we now look forward and take a perspective of each of these four groups on what the new networks, in particular, and NIHR in general, might be able to develop. Starting unashamedly with the patient perspective. Some really simple observations. Personally, I think, and I am also a patient, as many of you I'm sure will be, it is still too hard to see what research studies might be available to you, to me, to patients. And we need to make more progress in that domain. Because there is no doubt about it that there is a national penny dropping that research is good for patients. it's good at an organisational level, and can be good for you as a patient. And in Manchester, I'm sure, will receive referrals from all over the country, just as we do in Leeds, because they will get access to particularly late phase 2 and phase 3 studies that they won't get through local providers. So this is key. We need to make it easy for the patients to participate. The research community, one might consider to be thoroughly well supported, and indeed in this country I think they are generally, but I still come back to a simple mantra of mine that in order to get researchers really firing on all cylinders and doing what we and they want to do, they need time and title. And I think we can explore that a bit more. I think there is room for lots of local initiatives that accord that. In Leeds, I drove through a scheme working with our erstwhile and current dean, in which we accorded NHS clinicians the title of Honorary Clinical Associate Professor. And you'll have similar things, I'm sure, in Manchester. But the point about that is not the process of awarding the title, it's what you do afterwards. It's about looking after those people, making sure the job planning process is supportive. And I'm not just talking here about doctors, although there are particular challenges in that territory. But I would urge you to explore extending and developing such schemes locally, because that's all grist to the network mill. And we are trying to develop cross-organisational communities of practice which are clinically led. And actually, what I'd really like to see, and you've got a clerk in this territory, so you can make progress here, is the development of similar networks for managers. The managers for general management trainees in particular, and more senior people, are a real asset to the network. And we must engage them as equal partners in this. For too long, the model has been eminent clinical researchers dictating to managers their demands. That won't work anymore, and it doesn't need to. But I want to see more managers engaged in the conduct of research. Industry imperatives remain to an extent, particularly given the national position in relation to funding. The success of the network will be judged on our ability to deliver for industry. And I want to try and put to bed a couple of urban myths. The first is that we're losing late phase trials to the rest of the world. That was true. Here we see data that supports my contention, which is that we are no longer losing late phase activity to Eastern Europe and the Far East. This shows the number of CTAs granted by the MHRA. Red, phases 2 to 4, blue, phase 1. So actually, we have regained the position we had back in 2003 or thereabouts in terms of the later phase activity, but we continue to lose studies in the early phase. And that's a very interesting observation, which we need to reflect on, because we need to turn that blue curve upwards, just as we've managed to do, I think, certainly in part through the network enterprise for the late phase activity. And our market share in Europe is steady. Europe as a whole is losing activity, but we are we have regained our position. And the companies that I talk to, and I know Martin and Debbie who talk to as well, are increasingly saying that the UK is a good place to do clinical research, and we absolutely must keep our foot to the floor in relation to that. The final perspective I just want to draw attention to is back to the NHS engagement piece. My observation in terms of the organisational commitment to the conduct of research is that it is enormously strengthened if research is seen as one of the proxies for clinical quality. And we need to keep pushing that message. It is incredibly important, and in a time when CQC pays everyone a lot of attention, metrics related to research activity should be part of that submission. There's a lot of policy material that's very supportive of the NHS constitution, patients' right to participate in research that may be of benefit. The new commissioning contract for 14-15, which builds in the obligation to conduct research. All that is there. We now need to deploy this in practice. We also now in the NHS have arguably an innovation and research system which looks a bit like this. and which links together the assets and initiatives that Mike was alluding to, the academic health science networks and indeed the centres. But and here you see the relationship between some of these and the clinical research network. Now, of course, it's easy to draw a diagram. It is still somewhat complex and a little bit confusing, acronym soup, all that good stuff. But my plea is that is for local ownership and initiative. Because if it feels right, and if you think it is going to deliver the broader aim of increasing high-quality research, then I would do it. Don't wait for central diktat to tell you how this structure should unfold and maybe best integrated and exploited. You know that better than we do. So, final slide. The new network will succeed if we have distributed, strong, effective leadership, not just in the clinical domain, but in the management domain. And I'm delighted that Mike and Central Manchester have stepped up to the plate, just as we're very grateful to the previous hosts for putting their skin in the game. This is crucial. But it is leadership that is about developing a community of practice and communities of practice, comprising clinicians, managers, cross-organisational, focused on getting access for patients to research. We will be judged on our impact, and some of that is an economic impact, so the industry piece is absolutely crucial. But at the end of the day, I suppose the real asset test will be the extent to which in a year or two's time people see research as the yeast in the mix, and that's what this pile of sand looks like. It's actually denoting. In other words, we won't be saying, as in the early days of networks, people were saying, oh, well, it's only a modest amount of funding, so we can forget about it. This is the stuff that determines the flavour of the health service. And the research network is in a unique position to be able to do that. And I want the increasingly people on a geriatric ward or in primary care in Oldham to say, you know what, are we offering our patients the possibility of participating in a high-quality research study because it will be good for them and it will be good for the organisation. That's the real asset test, and that is the value that I attach to the new organisation. So I'm confident that Greater Manchester will be an exemplar. It was in the past, and I pay tribute to Martin and Debbie's leadership and that of the topics. But we wish you well, and go too.